Light heavyweight bout here. Tyson Pedro coming in at -110 against Anton the Pleasure Man Turkalj sitting at -120. Over under 2.5 rounds plus 180 for the over, -220 for the under. 2-3 in his last 5 for Tyson Pedro, and a nice old 3-2 for Anton Turkalj. 2-fight losing streak for him. But if you look a little closer at his losses, they aren't anything that you could really hang your head on. Lost to Jilton Almeida in his UFC debut, and a loss to Vitor Petrino. His last time out, that was back in March. And they weren't like great performances, but those are some two absolute units of men. And to lose to them isn't anything crazy. But either way, I mean, he's 0-2 in the UFC. And Tyson Pedro, I don't really know where he's at in his career, because he came into the UFC super green. I mean, he was 4-0 when he came into the UFC. He's been in the UFC since 2016. He had a pretty good start with the wins over Khalil Roundtree and Paul Craig, and then eventually goes on a 2-fight losing streak, gets the injury, comes back. They give him the Ike Villanueva treatment, the Harry Hunsucker treatment. They're trying to get him some wins, and he does. He looks good in those, obviously, because those guys kind of suck. And then last time out, he looks like he sucks against Modestas Bukauskas, UFC 284. That was in Perth, Australia. He was set up. I don't want to say set up to win in that one, but he was a -220 favorite against Modestas. And it looked like he didn't really have it in him in that one. And then it comes out that he had some kind of injury or illness going into the fight, but he still wanted to fight in front of the home crowd. So I don't know what to think with Tyson Pedro, but I'm not sure I'd think that highly of Turkalj either. So this is a tough one. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I've never really been that high on Tyson Pedro. Especially looking at his record, man. His last 2 wins are all these guys are beating Harry Hunsucker in their last few fights. But Harry Hunsucker and Ike Villanueva, and then before that, he took a loss to Shogun Hua, and then Oben St. Peru before that. Who were 2 older guys who are now both retired, I believe. I know Shogun is. Not sure about. Is he too?
He should be by this.
Should be if he. Yeah.
I don't think he is.
Yeah, and outside of that, man, I mean, when he came into the UFC, damn near 7 years ago now, beats Khalil Roundtree and he beats Paul Craig. So those are 2 decent wins, but hasn't really fought anybody since then. And then loses to Bukauskas at home in your home country. That's tough. And I don't know. Obviously, he talked about injuries and stuff, but it almost looked like the pressure of fighting in front of that crowd got to him a little bit, because you could see it from the walkout. Like, he looked nervous, wasn't himself. And if he does that here against Turkalj, I think Turkalj is just going to take him down, wear him out, and kind of grind out that win, or even find a submission. Like, I look at Turkalj, and even though he's lost his first 2 UFC fights, you got to look at who he's losing to. I mean, he's losing to Jilton Almeida, who's on the come up, and a lot of people think is going to be that next title contender in the next couple of years. And then he loses to Vitor Petrino, who we saw live, I believe, at 290.
Yeah.
Was he at 290? Yeah. And he's a monster. He's super powerful. He's super athletic, and he has some wrestling to his name as well, and can get submissions. And Turkalj was able to go all 3 with him and basically match him in most areas. Significant strikes were pretty close. The takedowns were 5 for Turkalj and 7 for Petrino. So yeah, looking at that, like, those aren't the 2 worst losses you can take coming into the UFC, and it probably makes you better as a fighter, losing to guys like that. So yeah, I don't mind Turkalj here at all, especially against a guy like Pedro, who just hasn't really impressed, hasn't really beat any really good fighters lately, and he's lost to some pretty average ones. So the only thing he's really got going for him is being in front of his home country again, but he was last fight as well. So yeah, I think Turkalj probably gets this thing done. If he can just withstand the strikes on the feet from Pedro, he's going to land a takedown at some point in this fight. And once he does, I think his control is good. I think he'll be the better fighter in the grappling, and I think he'll pull out the win, whether it's by sub or decision.
This is what I'm keeping my eye on, because I think a lot of people are going to be down on Tyson Pedro after the loss, which is like totally warranted, because it was a tough one to look at. But I know he was in a lot of people's parlays for that UFC 284, and it's like kind of recent. And when he's in your busted your parlay, like, people are not quick to forgive that. So they're probably going to look at Anton Turkalj and see all the things that we just explained. Like he's losing to some pretty solid guys, but I don't think he really looked that good in those fights. Like
that's true too. Yeah,
like Vitor got a 30-26 on one of the judges' scorecards. Like if you do look at the stats, it looks pretty like close, but Vitor should have had that dude knocked out like a couple times. He had him just dead to rights a couple times, and then he just for some reason wanted to grapple with Anton Turkalj. That was like some of the dumbest fight IQ that I've seen. Vitor is an absolute unit, but I think he might be missing a couple IQ points as far as the fight IQ goes, because he could have easily knocked Anton Turkalj out. He just wanted to grapple with him. Don't know why. So I think this might be like a buy low spot on Tyson Pedro. If he's the underdog against Anton Turkalj, I think I got to go with Tyson Pedro, because Tyson Pedro has been super respected by the books. I mean, he was minus 800 against Harry Hunsucker, minus 630 against Ike Villanueva. That was coming off of like a 3-year layoff. He was minus 630. I mean, minus 565 against Shogun Hua back in 2018, before Shogun was like really falling off. So I think this is a buy low spot on Tyson Pedro. I'm going to go with him. I think he's skilled. I just don't really think he's like, I don't think he's got that dog in him, but I think he's got the skills to go out there and get a win against Turkalj. Turkalj is a tough fighter, but I think he's just outmatched on the feet. I think Pedro can hang with him on the ground. So I got to go with the dog and Pedro.
I think you look at the weigh-ins too and see what kind of shape Tyson Pedro's in, because in his last fight against Bukauskas, he didn't really look that in shape, and I think it showed in that fight too. So if he comes to weigh-ins all shredded up and looks a little different, I think that'd be a good sign for him.
Yeah, good point.